Hello, everybody, and welcome to a late seating review of X-Men Days of Future Past. Joining me is Steve Shives.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be back.
And, and just to let you know, we have decided to do these kind of reviews a little bit later after the release, after all the hype has died down, after all of the instant reaction videos have gone up on YouTube, and basically so that we can go to the theater late and actually be guaranteed a decent seat because everyone else has seen the movie. So starting off, we'll get straight to the review, and Steve, you're up first.
Well, when we reviewed Godzilla, it was easy because I loved that movie, even though it had lots of problems that we talked about. But with X-Men Days of Future Past, my opinion on it is a little more complicated. There's a lot about it that I really admired, but on the whole, I saw it a while ago, and I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've really thought about it this week leading up to this review, and I feel like I'm just kind of ambivalent toward it. It's not that I think it's a bad movie by any stretch, and like I say, there's a lot of it, especially technically and in terms of Bryan Singer's visual style as a director. There's a lot that I really, really admire, and then I can look at and think, wow, that was so well done. But emotionally, it just leaves me kind of cold. Like I feel like I don't really care that much about what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and to me that's sort of a problem. And it's in a way I've kind of felt that way about all the X-Men movies. I mean, other than X-Men 3 and the first Wolverine movie, I haven't thought that any of them were bad, really.
Mm-hmm.
But they just don't really get me. They don't grab me. And that's kind of important to me. Like, people wonder why, because I have, like, praised Bryan Singer's Superman Returns to the ceiling. Like, I love that movie more than a lot of people do, and they think, why do you like that movie so much?
You
And
and
it's
I have a review coming up for that, I think.
they say, like, why do you love Superman Returns so much? And they point out all the problems with it and all the inconsistencies and all the why, what about this and that. And the main thing is that it just gets me. It moves me emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And the X-Men movies for the most part don't really do that. But anyway, that's my general first impression of it is a lot to admire, but kind of emotionally leaves me wanting.
I would have to say that I probably enjoyed this movie a lot more than you. And by the way, this is the non-spoilers part. I will let you know when we go into the spoilers part because, Jesus Christ, there are a lot of spoilers that
Yeah.
are in this movie. So if you don't want to know what's going to be happening and if the X-Men franchise is important to you, after this bit is done, I'm going to make sure that you understand that we're going into spoilers territory. I appreciated the movie for what it was supposed to be, which was an entertaining. I don't even know how long it was. If it was 2 hours, it was a very fast 2 hours.
Yeah.
It did not lag. There weren't any draggy parts for me. You can't get a much better cast than this. There's no real super weak links. The only thing that I have is Jennifer Lawrence, I think, is a little miscast as Mystique. She doesn't seem to. She seems to be way too young to be playing that part. She's a great actress, don't get me wrong, but I just don't know if she's the right fit. But I mean, everyone else in this film was really good. I have a love-hate relationship with the X-Men comic and also with the previous movies as well. But one of the things that I will remark on is that this film accomplishes what Fox needed and what Fox wanted was that they wanted to have a reboot without having a reboot. They wanted to be able to restart the franchise, have it be reinvigorated with a lot more energy and a lot more. There was more humor in this than I remember in previous X-Men films. There's a very serious storyline in it, but they still managed to have some humor in it. They still managed to take us places that a lot of other superhero films haven't really taken us to yet. It resonates a little bit more strongly with me as far as the emotional impact of the characters. Maybe I'm a little bit more invested than I thought I was. But I overall enjoyed the film. and I'm glad I spent my. It's basically what it comes down to. If I'm happy that I spent the money to go to a frickin' theater and put on glasses that I hate to watch the damn thing, then it did its job, and it didn't leave me coming out angry at the studio for having subjected me to something that I didn't want. So now we'll go in more in depth. This is the spoilers part where we talk about the actual plot of the film and whether or not we had problems. And don't get me wrong, I like the film. It does have problems. But all films have problems, and it's whether or not you're able to look over those problems that testifies to the quality of the film. So,
absolutely,
everyone sitting here, I know that this is a 5-minute review for you. Go out and see the movie today, if you believe both of us that we kind of enjoyed the film, and then watch this on Monday, because this is spoilers.
Yes, and these won't just be spoilers for this movie, because of the way this movie is. We're basically spoiling the entire X-Men franchise.
This was not a starter film for anyone who has never seen an X-Men movie.
No, and I don't count that against it.
No, neither do I, because I thought they managed to touch on every film that had come out before this one and incorporate it into their, even though they're destroying the timeline, because this is a time travel story, and they're basically doing what J.J. Abrams did in Star Trek. He didn't destroy the Star Trek past when they did basically a reboot of Star Trek in 2009. Right. They used time travel to change the timeline, and that's what they're doing with this movie. They're securing their franchise. They're setting themselves up for another movie. And when I was watching this, towards the end, I realized, boy, they sat down and took a lot of notes from Marvel Disney, because there are changes to this that you can clearly see. They managed to find someone who could write for an ensemble. I didn't feel that there were any characters that just didn't have anything to do, with maybe the exception of Hank, the Beast character.
He's sort of just Xavier's pal.
Yeah, he's Xavier's. Hank, carry me everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes, and he has this new Hulk ability where he can turn on and off his Beast thing.
Yeah.
But what's amazing is it's a weird conglomeration of It's a Wonderful Life and the Terminator films, especially the Terminator 2.
Yeah.
There's a lot. If you need to know what it's very much like, the basic plot is Wolverine has to go back in time, a la Kitty Pryde's quantum leap powers that she suddenly has. Goes back to 1973, but into his own body, where he has to stop Mystique from killing Trask, who's going to make robots that in the future are going to actually be kind of frightening. They handled their CG fairly well in this movie, and they managed to make the Sentinels intimidating in the future, at the very least.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
But as well as they managed to use a time travel device to basically reset, and I fucking mean reset.
Yeah.
This universe.
Totally.
They also left themselves open to, if you really want to think about it too hard, boy, there's a lot of shit that don't make a lot of sense, that doesn't match up with what they were trying to do. But
it's a good comparison to make between this one and the Star Trek reboot, because it's almost as if they had done, J.J. Abrams had done his Star Trek, but had been able to bring along the entire original Star Trek cast,
right,
instead of just throwing Spock in as the token representative.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it that way, it's really kind of cool. And that's one of the things that, there's a cool factor to the movie. Whether you're an X-Men fan or not, if you're just a fan of just big Hollywood movie franchises and you like going to see like the Avengers and the Batman movies and the Superman movies, I mean, it's kind of just the premise itself is neat, and the fact that they were able to pull it off, to assemble the main characters from the first cast and bring them along and put them into the movie with the new cast, the first class cast, and to combine those two casts in a meaningful way, so it feels like the Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen aren't just sort of there just
they're kind of folded. They're just there to make an appearance.
Right. Their stuff is meaningful. Their stuff is part of the story. And then
Like Halle Berry's character,
yeah,
like
she's yeah.
Storm.
Now there are characters who do have that token feeling. Like,
Hmm.
let's just put Storm in here because why not?
Because she
Let's
was
see.
in the comic. Because in the comic, it's
Yeah,
Storm and Wolverine in the future, um, and I have to say that
yeah,
is kind of to their credit because they did at least seem to have read the comic.
yeah. Well, and there were in jokes here and there that you probably wouldn't get if you hadn't read the comic, like the bit with Quicksilver.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mentioning to Magneto, my mom used to know a guy who could do things with metal, and
Hmm.
and they don't like hit that really hard. And if you don't really know the backstory of those characters from the comics, you might just let that go by, like, oh, whatever.
Or the
But if you,
fact that at the end of the movie he's sitting there with his little sister in his lap, and anyone who knows
right,
the comics knows that Scarlet Witch is his little sister. So technically, there's a Scarlet Witch reference, and there's a lot of
right,
characters in there that I didn't readily recognize that I know that are from the comics, and that's what I mean by they're kind of paying more attention to what's in the source material in this movie, more so than they ever did
yeah,
um,
definitely,
from the previous films. Um, and I think that as a whole, they're very successful for what the business side of what this movie represents wanted, and that was renewed interest. I liked X-Men First Class. I wouldn't say it was a home run because some of it, I was like, is this a reboot? I was honestly
yeah,
thinking, is this a reboot? Are they just kicking it over? And then managing to incorporate the older films and have people show up that serve this overall story. And we'll just get right around to it. The ending of this movie. Here's a big spoiler. They changed the past and restore the future, and the only person that's really going to remember it is Wolverine. That's what the conceit is that since he's the one that goes back and does it, when he comes back to what is his present, he's going to be the only person that remembers any of this stuff. So when he comes back, he has restored. We have this bleak, apocalyptic, horrible future where robots have enslaved mutants and friends of mutants, and all of the mutants have been rounded up and killed, I guess. And the Earth is a blasted, horrible mess that kind of reminded me of the Earth from the Matrix films.
yeah, a little
Uh,
bit.
just a little bit. And this last group of mutants, which is Charles Xavier, Magneto, and a handful of others, are holed up in this Chinese monastery.
Yeah,
Um, and they have there's a X-Men named Kitty Pryde who sends Wolverine back into his body from 1973 to prevent Mystique from murdering Trask, who's played by Peter Dinklage,
Peter Dinklage, yeah.
who is dissecting mutants to learn their powers, and he creates giant robots who he then convinces Richard Nixon to use to protect
Reprising
people.
his role from Watchmen.
to use against the threat of mutants. And in this storyline, the reason why the future is so bleak is because they managed to capture Mystique after she murders Trask, and by studying her, they give the Sentinels a power to be able to absorb mutants' ability and use it against them. Now, I'm going to say this. That's not Mystique's ability. Mystique is a mimic. She's a chameleon. That's Rogue's ability. Rogue has the ability to absorb a mutant's powers and then use them. I have a feeling that there was a script that had Rogue as the person that is the main thing. And they said, "Are you kidding me? We have Jennifer Lawrence. She played Mystique in the previous film. She's an Academy Award winner. She's the hottest actress we have. We're going to change this script and turn it into Mystique." It doesn't make sense. Who cares? No one's paying attention.
Right.
It was like,
Well, and
okay,
also if you had used Rogue, you would have sort of made it a little too blatant that you were kind of sort of reusing a plot point from the first X-Men movie because
yeah, and I
Rogue
mean,
was like the mutant in jeopardy there too.
and it was also the same plot. Someone using Rogue in order to
Yeah.
do some kind of horrible thing. Um, I have quibbles with the film. Quicksilver has a pair of earbuds that I think were manufactured last week. Even though it's 1973,
You
I felt
know,
that they handled the Quicksilver character really well.
he was a highlight
Um,
for me.
he was a
Yeah.
highlight in the film. He has an entire sequence where they show it from his perspective about how he fights. So now DC and Marvel are going to have problems because Marvel is now doing a Quicksilver character in the next Avengers film, and DC, of course, has the Flash. So they're going to have to come up with new ways for their super fast heroes to be as awesome
Yes.
as that little sequence. I didn't feel that they really overused any character, or just none of the characters felt like they were tacked in just to be there. You know what I mean? It was kind of like Quicksilver was used very well. They had him come in. He did the thing that he was going to do, and then he wasn't just sticking around, or he was there to service the plot to move it
Yeah.
forward.
I did have a. I wondered, and I actually asked my wife after in the car after we had seen the movie. I said, "Wouldn't the like?" I understand for sheer filmmaking reasons. I understand why Quicksilver had to exit the film at a certain point because it would be really difficult to write the story if you have a super fast guy with you who can just do anything you
I
want.
was saving your ass for the rest of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it would be too easy, you know.
Right.
It would be like if Superman wasn't vulnerable to kryptonite, you know. It's like,
Hmm.
well, why do we even bother telling stories with this character?
Right.
Um, and so I understood that, but at the same time, I was like, man, didn't anybody even like didn't Xavier or Magneto or anybody even think like maybe we should bring this kid along?
Yeah.
This is really going to make our job so much easier. Um, but another thing that I really enjoyed about the movie, because I agree with you, I think that they used the ensemble really well, and I think that they balanced it very well,
Yeah.
probably better than any of the X-Men movies have so far. Uh, and they avoided focusing too much on Wolverine. Uh,
Even though he's perfectly used because even though he is the central figure, even though we're following him, it's not his story.
right.
It's not a
And
Wolverine centric story.
that in a way, I mean, I think that might be part of why the movie doesn't quite hit me emotionally like I kind of hoped that it would,
Hmm.
because you have a protagonist in Wolverine, you have a point of view character who isn't really the central character
Right.
of the story. Um, and then I might as well talk about this now since we're talking about Wolverine's role in the
Yeah.
film. Uh, well, see, I'm a big, I mentioned the last time we did this that generally speaking, I think the two most important shots in a film are the first shot and the last shot.
Hmm.
And this movie, and a really brilliantly thought, composed, executed final shot, to me, can go a lot towards redeeming a movie that I've been sort of on up to that point. Like if you
Hmm.
really finish strong, that's my last memory of the movie, and I'm like, oh yeah.
Right.
And I feel like this movie had a chance to do that, and then just kind of blew by it.
Right.
And it was in that final segment when Wolverine wakes up and the future has changed,
Yeah,
and
and he's
he's the only one who remembers, and all of his dead friends are alive again, and the school is back.
spoiler.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's as someone, if you've seen all the X-Men movies and you know everything that's happened, and it's nice to see, like,
Yeah.
Cyclops is there and Jean Grey is there, and like everybody's like, it worked, he
Yeah.
fixed the future, and it's a really nice scene. It's really, and that bit does work for me
Hmm.
emotionally. That it got me, and maybe I'm a sucker, maybe I'm too sentimental, but
No,
when
I was going to
Wolverine is
ask
like,
you if that was effective, if that worked for you.
yeah,
It worked
it
for
really
me.
was. It
That
worked
was the
really
last
well.
thing I was expecting at the end of the film was
Yeah,
for Wolverine to have this sentimental, oh, the
yeah.
old savings and loan and everything's,
Yes,
everything is,
it is. It's totally It's a Wonderful Life. But yeah, and that it really really worked for me, and I loved it because it was optimistic, and so many big blockbuster movies nowadays are very pessimistic or very dark. Even
mhm,
the Superman movies have this very
yeah.
dark, pessimistic. Well, we have to kill people in
When
order to
you
do.
have a character like Wolverine who basically murders people,
Right.
um, is the person that needs to inspire hope in the jaded younger um, Professor X.
Yeah.
Something has changed in the film where there's a lot of dark imagery, but it
Oh,
doesn't
it's
it doesn't wear its darkness on it like a cool, like a goth kid who is like
no,
I'm
and
I'm so dark.
and even though it does have some very dark moments, overall, the message, the theme is that it doesn't have to be this way. You know, the future can be better. Your actions in the present can lead to a better future, and that's a really optimistic theme, especially for a big budget superhero movie.
Yeah.
And I that really worked for me, and I really appreciated it. But the point. The point that I was hoping, and sometimes when I know that I'm getting toward the end of a movie, you can sort of tell that they're wrapping things up, and I kind of start to think like, okay, what's going to be, how are they going to end it? You know, what's going to be, and for me, I was so desperately hoping that they would cut to black and go to the credits after Wolverine goes into Xavier's office, and Xavier, you know, realizes that Wolverine is back, that he's you know, he's just woken up to the new future.
Right.
And of course, Xavier knows that was going to happen, but he doesn't remember anything. He just remembers based on his experiences with Wolverine back in the 70s. And so he realizes what has happened, that Wolverine has now sort of returned. And there's a wonderful shot of Patrick Stewart looking at Wolverine, and he says, "What's the last thing you remember?" And I was like, please cut to black, please cut to black, please cut to black. That would have been the perfect ending. And it didn't happen because they had to go back and put on what I feel is just a pointless, just, you know, tag at the end of Wolverine being fished out of the river back in the 70s.
By Stryker.
You know, by Stryker, and Mystique is there, and it's just like, oh, come on. I mean, I know they're going to make another one. They're going to do like X-Men Apocalypse, and they had like a post-credit scene to set that up.
Spoiler.
But like, they're gonna do they had a post-credit scene to set that up, you know. So I was like, why not just end this movie in the perfect way? Just end it with, you know, Wolverine is back and he's happy and his mission has been accomplished and everything is, you know, hearts and flowers and the end.
Right.
But no, they had to do a little extra clever stuff, and that kind of annoyed me. And because that up until that point, that final sort of epilogue with Wolverine back really worked really well for me.
That whole sequence was just it was a pleasant surprise because because at that point, while Wolverine's going back, my mind is going, okay, how many people know about the future, and are they going to do anything to change it? You know, is he just going to go back and we're going to see some future place, and it's going to be, you know, it won't be the Xavier Mansion, it won't be, you know, all of this stuff, or are they going to end it with him in the river and we're just going to keep going from 73 on?
Right. Not even sure the future at all.
Yeah, and having him wake up in the mansion and giving Wolverine a little bit of fucking payoff. You know,
right.
A lot of people love it when Wolverine is nothing but pain, but the pain that Wolverine endures, both in the comics and in the movies, pays off when he gets a little something that he's wanted. You can't just watch someone get beaten for 40, 50 minutes and then not let him have something. And the best part about it is that, okay, in the movie, Jean is alive. Jean never died, and whatever bullshit happened in 3.
Yeah.
So she's still alive. Unfortunately for Wolverine, Scott is still alive. And what's great about that is that they acknowledge the fact that he fucking missed Scott too, without it being overblown.
Right.
They did not overplay the schmaltz card that they could have done very easily. I will also say this. Patrick Stewart, his acting in this is very subtle, because up until I was worried about how old Patrick Stewart seemed through all of the future stuff, because he was like, hey Patrick, you're going to be in the last X-Men movie. Do I get to sit in the chair the entire time? Yes.
Exactly.
Oh, excellent. Because honestly, I think they were giving Ian McKellen electrical shots to walk the 20 feet that he needed to do to raise up his arm and do battle. Because he's looking kind of old too.
Yeah.
But I will say this: when they do after time has changed, when he says, "Oh, hello, Logan," he actually seems like he's not old anymore. You know, he was in the other one. He's beaten and tired, and I'm worried that Patrick Stewart is old and he's just doesn't have the energy to do anything.
Right.
And then they cut to this part, and he's like, "Oh, it's Professor X again," and his voice doesn't seem so weary, and he doesn't look like he's about to commit suicide anymore. That's great.
Yeah, and you realize that he was acting.
Yeah, who'd
he,
thunk it? Acting in a
he was
superhero
acting
movie.
in the old future. Yeah, because yeah, you're right. That he and Magneto both in
Hmm.
that bleak post-apocalyptic future. They both seem like they're just about done.
And
You know.
they also establish how long their friendship is at that point,
Yeah.
and I know that they're really close friends in real life at this point,
Right.
but you really do get a feeling that these are people who have been at odds with one another, but also in their own way feel that they are trying to save one another in their own weird way.
Hmm.
Magneto really wants Charles to see the world from his perspective because of how close of a relationship they are. They have spent the time doing that. They spent a lot. Because of X-Men First Class. I buy that relationship at this point, including the relationship they have the very first X-Men movie. Knowing what I know from X-Men First Class, they took the time to establish that they are friends and why they are friends and why this is such it's a very complicated relationship between two men
Yeah.
on screen.
And
Um,
it is one of the strengths I think of the X-Men franchise is that because you really a movie is set apart by the things that it has that other movies don't, not by the shit that it copies from other movies.
right.
And the X-Men franchise, that relationship between Xavier and Magneto and how they are both, you can tell even before First Class when they really went into details about their younger days, you can tell that there's a lot of emotional bond between those two characters. The way Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen play those scenes between Xavier and Magneto, you can tell that they have a lot between them and that they care about each other and that they don't want to harm each other. They're just ideologically opposed, and they neither one of them feels like the other can be allowed to win. And that's the sort of relationship that you don't really see.
Mhm.
It's kind of unique to have the best friends and arch enemies simultaneously.
Yeah.
You know?
Now,
And
talking about enemies, do you feel that there was a clear-cut villain in the film?
um,
I mean, I know that they would be considered villains, but they take the time to give their motivations as to why they're doing what they're doing. For
right.
example, Trask
Yeah.
does heinous things in this film. He's not. I don't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that he is a good person per se. Um, but he definitely has a fear that is pushing him to do what he is doing, while at the same time seemingly to have a kind of admiration and wonderment at the very mutants that he claims that he wants to fight against, that he's worried that they're going to wipe out humanity. Um, it was an it was a very they gave that character a lot, even though he's not on screen a whole lot. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like they really couched him with a lot of very contradictory um, motivations. I believed him when he said that he's concerned. I don't think that he's not someone who's out for money. Once again, while ultimately the goal is to save the world, the individual villains in this have motivations that you could probably understand. If we were normal people and we saw a mutant rip out an entire stadium to surround the White House and nearly kill the president and everyone else, I don't know if I would necessarily, and knowing nothing about mutants because they haven't really been the forefront in the news, if I was just a regular person, I don't know if I wouldn't be supporting Trask, if that's the
No,
case.
yeah, of course. Of course. And yeah, I think the reason that Trask I think is such an interesting character is that he doesn't really have to go full-blown villain
No.
because he's just sort of the specific example of what is really the source of conflict, which is the future. I
Hmm.
mean, Wolverine has been sent back to stop Trask and to stop the assassination of Trask. Uh,
Right.
which is supposed to then sort of kick his program into overdrive, which
Mhm.
leads to the horrible future. But Trask is just sort of the personification of it. The
Right.
real enemy is the future, and because that future is sort of an unintended consequence. It's not like Trask won and he got the future he wanted. It's
Yeah,
sort of an
exactly.
unintended consequence.
No one
So
wants that future. It
right,
looks
it
like.
just it's like it just sort of, oh shit, just sort of happens. But so that allows what you can give Trask some of those more human moments where he's like, I don't really, I just I want to unite humanity. I want to unite humanity against a common foe, so we can throw aside our differences and come. I mean, that's kind of a noble goal, even though he has such a horrible way of achieving it. So it makes him a little more relatable. It's not as you can't just hate him and say like, oh, he's evil. He needs to be stopped
Yeah.
because he
That being
has an
said,
understandable.
I
Yeah.
would have liked a little more backstory on Stryker. He, of all the characters that appear in this film, he's around, but we have no idea of what he's thinking. We have no idea. He mentions that he has a son who we all know
Hmm.
now is also a mutant,
Right.
but we don't get any glimpses into his head about his motivations. He is kind of just being a bad guy. You know.
Yeah, and he's one of those characters. How we mentioned they mostly avoid this sort of thing with the future versions of the X-Men, but I mean Stryker, he kind of seems like he's just there because that character's been established already.
Yeah, and the other
You
thing
know.
is that he is also a character that is specifically about Wolverine.
Right.
And so I'm really hoping that this character doesn't make it. I don't think we need to see him again. I think that they're hopefully they're done with the whole Wolverine origin crap.
Yeah.
About him being, Weapon X and all this other stuff. Hopefully that's all done and we don't have to worry about it and they can move on to what is probably going to be an even bigger movie with Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is also another sign of the notes that they took from Marvel Disney, because this one was actually named after a comic book series, Days of Future Past. From the advance word, the next one is X-Men: Age of Apocalypse, which was also taken from a comic book series, Age of Apocalypse. And a lot of the other X-Men films felt inexpensive, if that is the word. They
Hmm.
felt, while they may have had a fairly decent script, it didn't seem like they were spending a whole lot of money on it. It's kind of like, hey, we got this thing, we'll put some money and we'll just do this other stuff.
Yeah.
This one really felt like Fox went, we're going to spend some money and really firmly establish this franchise. This movie could not have been inexpensive to make. They have a lot of hot name stars reprising roles. I mean, this cast is actually fairly impressive. There isn't
Very much.
anyone in this that I really don't like, and I really appreciate the fact that Fassbender and I can't remember the name of the guy who plays uh,
Oh,
young
and
Charles.
yeah, you said it, and I immediately forgot.
Yeah, and
Oh shit.
both of those actors are two
James
actors.
McAvoy. James
Thank you,
McAvoy.
James
Yes.
McAvoy. Both of those actors are actors whose work I really liked in previous stuff,
Oh, very much.
and they aren't slumming
No, not
in
at all.
this. None
Actually,
of them are.
now that you brought those guys up, I one of my favorite scenes in the movie, other than that ending scene with Wolverine, is the first scene with Magneto and Charles in the past, in the airplane,
Yeah,
where they sort of have it out. This their first time being reunited after Magneto's been in prison for a long time, and Magneto kind of gets on his feet and is shouting at Charles about having abandoned the mutant cause, and he mentions all the mutants that have died since the events of First
yeah.
Class, and how Charles he feels like Charles turned his back on them. And I
Hmm.
remember watching that scene and thinking, man, Fassbender is acting the shit out of this. I mean, he is,
Yeah, he's doing it.
the yeah, and that's something that the X-Men movies, especially this one, but really all of them, have had, that really sets them in. A lot of the big budget superhero movies have very impressive actors in them now, but
Mhm.
the X-Men, the first Bryan Singer's first X-Men is sort of thought of as like being the inaugural
It
film
was kind of
of
the kickoff of this
yeah,
whole era of superhero movies.
yeah, the new superhero renaissance, if you want to call it that,
Mhm.
and you have these actors of an incredibly high caliber who have done serious dramatic work in film and been
Mhm.
nominated for Oscars and are, I mean, you can just, even if this is the only movie you've ever seen Michael Fassbender in, you can just tell by this performance
Oh,
that
and by the
this
way,
is a
if it
serious
is the only
actor.
Michael Fassbender film you've
Yeah,
seen, shame on you.
yeah,
Holy
shame on you because
shame
he's
is
amazing.
actually one of the.
It's one of my favorite Michael
Yeah.
Fassbender movies. He's
If you
amazing
ever
in it.
wanted to see his dick and be impressed
Yeah,
by his acting, go see Shame.
there
Holy.
you go. Yeah, and then wonder why the dude didn't win Best Actor for that because
Yeah,
that was amazing.
exactly.
Um, but yeah, he's an incredible actor, and he really throws himself into it,
Hmm.
and it elevates the material because
Yeah.
even as well executed as it is, and as much as I admire it stylistically, and I really think that Bryan Singer is one of those directors that can handle material like superhero material and do something with it to sort of trick you into thinking that it's really serious, even though
Hmm.
underneath that surface, I mean, it's superhero, it's silly, it's
Yeah.
fantastical, and that there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just what it is.
Hmm.
And you have an actor like Fassbender or like James McAvoy or like Ian McKellen or like Patrick Stewart,
Hmm.
and they're elevating the material. They're taking something
You
that could in other hands be very silly and just kind of whatever, and they're making it feel important and serious.
you don't feel like they're just picking up a paycheck. You
No.
don't feel like they're just there contractually. I know for a fact Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen don't need the X-Men. At this point, they don't. Their careers are not dependent on these two characters.
No.
Um, and you get that way. Even some of the minor characters are really, really well done. There's a whole group of mutants at the very beginning where they. And this is also something else. This is the first time where I ever felt like they actually had a comic book worthy fight sequence.
Hmm.
Is the beginning of this film where they finally feel like they're not holding back. There are mutants using their powers the way we see them using their powers in comic books, in a very impressive and very new way. It's I don't know who I think that Sunspot, Blink, is it Bishop?
Bishop's there, yeah, yeah.
And Bishop and I don't know. There's a couple other I can't really remember where they're fighting off Sentinels, where it finally felt like, okay, yeah, it may be fan service, but you know what? It's satisfying fan service. It's paying attention to how visually we want to see them fight. If you compare that to the to the ending sequence in the first X-Men movie, where it was, we've got to lift Wolverine in the air with Storm's weather powers, it felt like it feels like a bad,
Yeah.
Corman TV movie that would have appeared on Sci-Fi. Um, and compare that to this, it is much different. It's very satisfying for
Yeah,
me.
and well, the thing that makes
Um,
it the thing that makes it really really good is it is fan service because you're seeing characters that you haven't really seen before, and they're
yeah.
using their powers. And if you're a big X-Men comic fan, you're gonna recognize stuff, and you're gonna be like, finally, they're doing what I always wanted them to do. But
Hmm.
even if you don't know who those characters are, which I really don't, other than their
Yeah.
names. I mean, I'm not like a big X-Men comic reader. I just sort of recognized who they were, but
I'm not. I wasn't either. I
yeah,
I always viewed, and I'll apologize to all the female comic book people out there. I always felt that X-Men was a girls' comic because every time I picked up an X-Men comic to read, there was a lot of girls talking about who they were dating. Kitty Pryde seemed to have dated every male member of the X-Men at some point, and it was kind of like, remember, this is back in the 80s when supposedly girls didn't like comics, which was bullshit. But I
yeah.
kind of always felt like, this isn't really for me. I was more into Spider-Man and stuff like that. I knew enough so that when the cartoon came on in the early 90s, I really liked it. But even watching that, you can really see the soap opera-y kind of feel to X-Men.
Oh, very much. Oh, and
Um,
because they had those continuing storylines too,
yeah.
which is very reminiscent. I mean, lots of shows do that now, but at the time it felt like very soap opera-y,
Mhm.
like
A lot of
picking up.
unrequited love. A lot, Wolverine loves Jean. Jean doesn't
Yeah,
really love Wolverine. And Gambit loves Rogue, and Rogue can't be with a man. And, just
yeah, a
lots
lot of
of that.
angst.
A
Yeah,
lot of angst. And we saw
yeah,
that in X-Men 3, actually, with the whole Bobby Drake, Kitty Pryde, Rogue storyline.
yeah.
Um, But it was kind of like when I left the movie, I was actually feeling good about it. I really gauge a movie by how I'm feeling when I leave the theater, and if I'm happy and I'm going over stuff in my head, and I'm like, oh, that was really really good, then it was a good movie as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say it's a bad movie. I think it is a good movie. I just
Mhm.
feel like, it doesn't uh it doesn't get me,
Yeah,
And
no,
and to be
I don't
fair,
think it's going to be one of those movies that we look back at it 20 years ago.
no.
Wow, no one's making movies like that anymore.
Yeah, right. And to be fair, I mean, the Avengers didn't really get me either, but the Avengers got me just because of how funny it was. I just thought
Yeah,
the Avengers it reminded me sort of like of in the same vein as like Ghostbusters, of like a really great action comedy type of thing where the interplay
right.
between the characters was just really funny and amusing. But yeah, that big fight in the beginning of Days of Future Past, it works not just as fan service, but it's just an incredibly well choreographed and executed fight scene. So even if
Mhm.
you're like me and you don't really have a lot of stake in who the characters are, it's just impressive, just purely on a technical level, that they
Yeah.
actually put so much thought and creativity into, let's see how, let's showcase their powers, let's stage these fights in a way that is like something that you haven't seen before,
And
and
it
that's
also,
something that.
there were no fights in there. There's no sequences in here that don't serve the overall story. You have this massive fight with these things at the very beginning of the film so that you know what the stakes are. You know what it is they're
Right.
fighting for. If we didn't have anything establishing that, then it would just be a Wolverine time travel bullshit.
Right.
And they could have told us how dire it is, which is lazy writing, where they could have said it's very dire, Wolverine. We have millions of mutants have died, and these robots are real bad. And then they could have sent him back in time. And instead of doing it with exposition, they decided, okay, we're gonna kill all of these mutants at the very beginning of the film, and
Yeah.
basically set up the entire rest of the movie by showing you this thing and then giving you a little bit of explanation later on.
Yeah,
You know.
and the rest of the movie did a really good job. The whole movie in general, I think, did a really good job of hitting its action beats without just defaulting to big fights.
Hmm.
Because there's sort of like there's a general formula for making a big action movie, and it's generally that you want to have an action beat, like maybe let's say every 10 minutes. And a lot of times, like with big modern superhero blockbusters, that's interpreted as we got to have a huge fight, and
Yeah.
it just becomes exhausting if there's like a huge fight every 10 minutes or even every 20 minutes. It's too much. And in this movie, there's a huge fight at the beginning that's really well executed, and for the rest of the film, they hit those action beats in a much more in a much more creative way. They do the suspenseful, like the break into the Pentagon,
Yeah.
and Quicksilver's scene where you see everything from his perspective, which is also sort of played for laughs,
Yeah.
in addition to being a really
What
cool
was the
scene.
song he's listening to while he's doing all that? It's
Time in a bottle.
Time in a Bottle. That's right.
Yeah, and I love it because they use it ironically, like
Yeah.
that's because that's such a sappy song, and if you play that song and you expect people to sort of react to it in like straight, it will
Hmm.
just play as cornball. But they use that song, and it's like, and he's doing all these funny things while the song is playing. He's like
Yeah.
turning people so that when he goes back to normal time, they're going to punch each other, or
Hmm.
he fucks with people in such a way, and it's funny. But there's
Yeah.
also this sappy song playing in his headphones. So
Hmm.
that's a really well done sequence. So they don't just have big fights for the action scenes. They come up with more
Exactly.
creative ways of doing it, and I really appreciated that.
Hmm. So, I mean, overall, I'm going to recommend this film. I'm going to say that if you like superhero movies, here's the problem with it. This movie does reference every single X-Men movie up to this point. It does not discount them. There are things that happen, especially, well, no, they even reference X-Men 3 is in there too because it
Yeah.
pays off at the end of the movie. So as hard as it is going to be for me to recommend that you see X-Men 1, 2, and 3, yeah, I would recommend you seeing them
Yeah.
because it actually does make the payoff at the end of this movie with Wolverine more impactful than if you just saw it, you know, cold. and this was your first X-Men movie. This is not a good first X-Men movie at
Yeah.
all. It requires a little bit of backstory, and unfortunately, unlike the comics, we don't really have little blurbs at the bottom that says "see issue blah blah blah" at the bottom,
Right.
or people giving huge amounts of exposition in order to explain things. They show Jean Grey's and Wolverine's history as someone scanning Wolverine, reading his mind. And so we see it in flashes and images from the previous films. Well, even those are put there for people who have seen the other films. You know the context behind them, so you basically know what's going on. So it really does inform your ability to enjoy this movie. So I'm going to recommend it. I'm going to also recommend that if you haven't seen the other films, that you probably should see them. Avoid Wolverine Origins at all costs. You do not need to see it in order to enjoy this movie. I think actually the film avoided Wolverine Origins as well, because they did not show any scenes from that one in any of the flashbacks. And you know what? I think it's worth seeing the movie, paying full price, or even seeing it in 3D. Although the 3D is really kind of wasted. There's nothing here that really lends itself to being in 3D. But it is, if I feel it's worth my getting dressed and going out to a movie theater and buying my $7 Diet Coke and putting on a pair of glasses to watch it, I think that it is worth it. So that's my recommendation for this movie. Steve?
I would recommend it. I don't think it's something you shouldn't go out to see. I mean, I wouldn't say it's my highest recommendation, but it does so much right, and it's so skillfully done in so many ways that I couldn't say it's a bad movie. It's a good movie. It's a very good movie. It just doesn't. It leaves me lacking in a few areas that I like to have fulfilled. If I'm going to really rave about a movie. But the main thing, like the acting is so good.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like me feel like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is maybe just a notch below, like the best portrayals of Superman and Batman. Like I have such admiration for Hugh Jackman.
He
as
pretty
Wolverine.
much owns that role, and when he was first cast, I thought he's a skinny little pretty boy. He can't play Wolverine. And what he gets is the underlying pain that Wolverine has.
Exactly.
There's never been a false note with him, because we both know. He likes musical theater when he's not playing Wolverine. You forget all of that. You forget that he did Les Mis, the movie version, 2 years ago.
I wish I could forget that.
Because when he is playing Wolverine, he is playing Wolverine, and that is a role that he's very comfortable with at this point. And oh, by the way, holy shit! How old is he again?
Oh, I guess he's in his north 40s, I would think.
He trained goddamn hard. You get to see Wolverine's butt in this movie. But there's this.
This is for you, ladies.
Where he,
gentlemen,
an older guy, but he's not built like one. That's for damn sure.
No, it is. I mean, Jackman is in such good shape that he can play like old Wolverine from like 30 years from now in the whenever that is in the future, and he can also play Wolverine in the 70s. And basically, it's like, oh, you totally buy it.
Yeah.
He could be in his 30s or he could be in his 50s, and it's but yeah, he gives a really good performance as Wolverine in this movie. If I was going to point out any other flaw in it, it would just be I almost that Wolverine isn't central enough to it, just because his character is so pivotal to the plot. But those are just quibbles. I mean, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is terrific.
And besides, he's had more than enough exposure. He's been the central character in all of the X-Men movies to this point. Right. So at first I was really worried when the movie started. I was like, "Oh shit, this is another Wolverine movie."
Another Wolverine movie.
And it turns out it's not.
Yeah, it's actually more of an ensemble than the other ones have been. Really.
He is the vehicle that we follow. He's as much the central character as the droids are in Star Wars. We follow them along too, but the story isn't about those two fucking droids.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but I recommend it. I recommend, especially if you're an X-Men fan and you want to see a really nice payoff to the original versions of those characters, and performances are great, action scenes are incredibly well staged. So I would give it a recommendation.
Yeah. Okay, so we recommend X-Men Days of Future Past, and now we're going to add a little bit to the segment at the very end where Steve and I recommend movies that we've seen that we either didn't think enough people saw or maybe some people don't know about. So I am going to make a recommendation going from a gigantic, super expensive tentpole film to a movie that cost nothing to make and practically no one saw, because I saw the box office for this fucking movie and it made nothing. Maybe it was because it was only on 2 screens in the United States, but the movie I'm going to be recommending is History of Future Folk. And basically, History of Future Folk is about an alien from the planet Hondo who arrives on Earth and is supposed to destroy the Earth with this virus bomb. He lets the virus bomb go off, kills everyone on Earth, and then everyone on planet Hondo comes to Earth to repopulate it. The problem is that when he arrives on Earth, he discovers something that they don't have on planet Hondo and immediately falls in love with it, and that thing is bluegrass music. He falls in love with, actually, they don't have any music at all whatsoever. He falls so in love with music that he, flash forward a few years, he's married, he has a child. He tells his child these stories about Planet Hondo. The kid thinks it's just a story he's telling her. The wife thinks it's just a story he's telling her. And then he gets dressed up in his old spacesuit, which literally has a modified, this is how cheap it is, a modified painted bucket for the helmet part. And he goes down to a local bar that's run by Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, and he plays these kind of upbeat bluegrass songs about Planet Hondo and about what it's like to be alone on the planet Earth. And the thing is that he's never made any communication back with Hondo. So the problem with Hondo is it's about to be destroyed by an asteroid. So they all have a place that they need to go move to, and it's supposed to be Earth. And he hasn't done that, and he hasn't told them what's going on. So they send an assassin to go and come and find out what's going on, and if he isn't following his plan, to kill him. Problem is, they send the bottom-of-the-barrel assassin as a test assassin, and so the people on Hondo know that if they don't hear from him, that means they can actually spend the money on a real assassin to come after him after that guy disappears. So this assassin is portly, not trained, and he also immediately falls in love with the planet, with planet Earth, and with music, and they form a duo which starts playing in bands. I'm not going to let go what happens in the rest of it, but for a movie that costs nearly nothing, it is probably one of my favorite films that I've seen in the last 5 years. It is well written. It is very funny. The actors do very good jobs doing what they're supposed to do in the film. It does feel like it was made for no money, so don't think that they're getting, that they've made this fantastic special effects film for nothing. But it is one of those films that, you watch and you go, why can't more people just write good scripts and make a film knowing that they're not going to make any money? Because I don't think these guys thought that this was going to take off and be the indie hit that was going to sweep and it was suddenly going to become really popular. It's not. Is it very hipstery? It's made in Brooklyn. It features 2 guys dressed up like space aliens playing bluegrass music. What do you think? Yes. It's kind of hipstery, but not to the point in which you'll be like, ugh. This is not boasting cred. If you're a hipster, you're not going to be boasting, well, I saw History of Future Folk when it was playing on one screen at the Alamo Draft House. And so that's my recommendation. You can find it on, I believe you can still find it on Netflix. I think you can find it on Amazon. It's well worth the hour and a half that you're watching it. And I liked it much better than a lot of really expensive crap that has been pushed at me the last 2 years from the studios. Steve, off to you.
That sounds like a great movie. I'm going to go watch that. I haven't seen that one. So, well, my recommendation, I played a little bit of hopscotch to find a movie to recommend. I started with Bryan Singer, director of the film we reviewed today. And, of course, Bryan Singer made a big splash at the start of his career by directing The Usual Suspects, which was a very highly acclaimed crime drama. People said it was sort of like a neo-film noir. So for my recommendation, I'm going back, taking that film noir connection, and jumping back to what I think is probably the best of the classic film noir movies. One of my favorite films, and a film that if you're like a movie person, you've probably seen, but if you're just someone who just happens to be watching this video, you might not have seen it, and it's Out of the Past. Uh,
Oh wow, I haven't. Okay.
yeah, it's from 1947 and starring Robert Mitchum, one of my favorite actors, probably one of the coolest human beings who has ever
Hmm.
lived. The effortless embodiment of cool, Robert Mitchum, and just an extraordinary actor, incredibly charismatic, incredibly powerful. And this is one of his best movies, if not his best movie. And it's just a classic film noir. Mitchum plays a character who is sort of being pulled at by people from his past, and he is asked to go look after a woman from a friend of his who he has a past with, who is now um, sort of a criminal type of guy, and he wants him to go and check up on a girl that he's interested in. He's afraid that she's going to leave, and a love affair develops, and just all these classic film noir elements, sort of the man being pulled by circumstance into doing something he doesn't really want to do, and getting in over his head, and just lots of beautiful black and white photography, and just an incredible, wonderful performance by Robert Mitchum. And Kirk Douglas is in this as well, and Virginia Houston, Jane Greer, just a lot of really great old 1940s Hollywood stars in this movie. And if you've never been into film noir, if you always wondered what's the deal with film noir, there are so many great movies made in that style that you can look to, and to me, Out of the Past is one of the best, if not the best. And there's a wonderful scene in it, and it's the scene it's sort of like my mental shorthand for when I think about Robert Mitchum. There's a scene in Out of the Past when he's gone to a nightclub to look for somebody, and I think it's the guy who owns the club. And of course, the guy who owns the club is like sitting in the back in an office away from everything. And Mitchum comes in through the side door, and there's like a guard at the desk, sort of, as like the gatekeeper to make sure nobody gets back to see the boss who's not supposed to be there. And he stands up as Mitchum is approaching him, and he says, "What do you want?" And Mitchum goes, "Nothing," and he knocks the guy out, and just keeps on walking. Like the guy wasn't even there, and it's such an awesome. It's like that's everything you need to know. If you ever wondered why people think Robert Mitchum was a cool actor, he played characters like that, and he sold it. He made you believe that was the type of guy he was, like a sort of a laconic, laid-back guy, but a guy with a lot of very dangerous things.
The only time Robert Mitchum is better when he's being cool is when he's playing someone completely evil.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like, well, yeah. There's another great Mitchum movie, Night of the Hunter,
Oh my
where he
god!
where he where he where he plays someone evil, and that's another one. But yeah, that's my recommendation, Out of the Past, and it's available on Amazon Instant Video, and I think it's on Google Play as well for rent. So check that
I
one out
haven't
if you
seen
haven't
that
seen it.
in a really long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I actually will watch that tonight after Game of Thrones. But okay, everybody, the hour is almost up. We've managed to not go over or lose track of time and get the stuff
How
that we.
about that?
Yeah, isn't it neat when it's only an hour long and you can have the rest of the day to yourselves? So I like doing this. I'm not going to speak for Steve. We enjoy doing this, and right now we're kind of pressed for what to do next, because we're not going to be the type of person people who go running out to go see movies that we're really not interested in
Right.
watching and then doing a review on them. We were chatting before this. We were talking about what is it, the Tom Cruise's latest film.
Yeah, Edge of Tomorrow.
Neither one of us are really interested in seeing it while it's out in the theater. We have been discussing perhaps doing films that have long since been out, or have been out like within, let's say, 10 years or whatever, where we basically get to talk about something that's been out for a while that maybe no one else has reviewed because maybe they just don't want to review something that's 10, 15, 20 years old. But
Right.
that's interesting to me because I seldom get a chance to actually seriously discuss film with people. And Steve is the first person who I trust who disagrees with me enough so that I could get a different perspective on the film. So the next time we do this, it may not be something that's out in the theaters. If you guys have something that you would like to suggest, if there's a movie that you're like, oh, I wonder what these guys think about, Big Top Pee-wee or Ernest Goes
Yes.
to Jail, then leave it down below, and I'll seriously read it, and I'll send it to Steve, and we'll both have a
Yeah.
long laugh, and we might actually wind up doing it. But I like doing this, and
Yeah, I like it too. I want to keep this up because talking about movies is something I love to do too. So
okay,
it's nice
but
to have someone to talk about them with.
all right. So we're done. We're about to go off the air. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.